I just got done talking with my friend Lacy, and this really was a raw and vulnerable discussion. Um, it's truly one you're not going to want to miss because she is opening up in this conversation about her past with domestic violence and all the hardship that she's endured essentially as a victim in a lot of parts of her life. And she really gives us a lot of details into that, I think, and it helps me understand the thinking and the experience and the feelings and the fear and the courage and the strength and everything that's wrapped up in trying to get out of a violent situation like that. And she gives us a ton of hope into the future and loving herself back together again, essentially. And she's thriving now and she's ready to tell her story. And there's so much more to it that I think you'll be intrigued to listen to and watch. So this, above all interviews, is going to be one that you're going to want to watch, and I can't wait for you to do that. So let's jump in.
Well, Lacey, gosh, it's just such an honor to be able to talk with you today and hear you tell your story. And um, I just, I'm just so grateful, really, just to be able to sit with you. So thank you so much for joining today. Before we jump in and get into all of that, I just want to give a little bit of a background around how we got connected and how we met. So my coach, Mike, is good friends with you, and he and Bob Goff go in and actually visit your husband in San Quentin State Prison. And
Yeah.
so that's how, and then through him, you guys have all become good friends. And so they know that you're just really wanting to share your own story because while your husband has a story, you have a story together, you also have a personal story too. And so that they connected us because of that, so that we could together, you can share your story on the platform through Love Like Stories. So I just want to first by like thank you so much again. This is really the first time that you're telling your story publicly, so I just really want to honor that. I hope that this whole conversation is done in grace and love, and um, I also, if there's anything that I ask you that you're like, I don't want to talk about that, I will totally respect that. I'm just really here to listen, to understand, and to be your friend. So thank you so much. And I think we can just start by if you want to share your story, and then afterwards I'll, um, ask questions. We can have a discussion. So
Yeah, sounds good. First, let me just start off by also thanking you for having me and giving me the opportunity. I think it's so amazing the way that God works and just brings people in your life. In a situation, when you brought up my husband, he's in prison. And so, we don't really associate positive things with people who are in prison. So I'm just so grateful for Bob and for Mike and for everybody that honestly goes in there and gives him the opportunity. And he's amazing. So we wouldn't be here today without him. So I'm so grateful for everybody. But yeah, so obviously my husband has a great story, and that's something that he gets to work on and develop and share. But I think what really has brought us together as a couple and that has made us powerful, is because one, we were absolutely united by God. My husband has not had an easy life. He made a lot of bad decisions, ultimately led him to prison. And so for me, I kind of was on the other side of that, where I also didn't make some very good choices, in my life, but I kind of fell onto the opposite side where I got into, an abusive relationship prior to him. I experienced teen pregnancy, so I have this background that really just, when we put it together, it's like it's both sides of the story. So for me, I grew up with my grandparents. My parents actually were teen parents as well. I was born on prom night. Um, they were too young to take care of me, so I was raised by my grandparents. I always grew up wondering and questioning, why didn't my parents make sacrifices to raise me? And, as a child, you can't wrap your mind around what it actually takes to be a parent. So I knew my parents struggled. I knew that they didn't make very good choices in their life. But I was raised in a very secure setting. So I kind of saw both sides of the world, where I grew up with such security, but I also saw my parents who really struggled in life. And for me, that really developed a soft spot in me for people who struggled, because I felt like I always wanted to fix my parents so that they could love me the way I needed to be loved. And honestly, I think that carried on to me so much in my adult life. I got pregnant by the time I was 19 years old. At that time, I was actually in college. I was playing softball. I had a full ride scholarship, and my coach came to me and said, "Look, you can either have an abortion or you can stay in college." And that's a lot to put on to a teenager. Um, Obviously, I chose to have my daughter. She will be 16 this year. I can't believe that. But um, that really began my personal struggles, because I couldn't do to her what had been done to me by my parents. So I chose to figure it out. And in doing so, I found myself making choices. I became a stripper. That was my first probably downfall of my choice. When I got into that whole lifestyle of working in a club, and, it was all about making money to survive, because it was really hard being a single mom. Now I was 20 years old and trying to do everything I could, because I could never give up on my daughter and let her experience that pain that I felt growing up. So while I was dancing, I met my first husband. We got married after 3 months. He didn't want me to dance. Um, so I was like, well, if you don't want me to dance, then you're gonna have to marry me, because that's the only way I can do it. We didn't know each other. He was from the East Coast and I didn't know him. So now I jumped into a marriage with somebody I barely knew. I quit dancing and basically became a stay-at-home mom to raise my daughter. Um, about 6 months into that relationship is when things really started to unfold for me. I found out that the person I had married had a very extreme drug addiction. So he was a great guy when he was sober. He would get high, and we had a whole different story kind of on our hands. So at that point, I was now trying to raise a young baby, dealing with somebody who had a drug addiction, and I began to experience domestic violence. Not too long, probably about 6 months into our marriage, we had planned to have a big wedding, because we originally did it in the Justice of the Peace. He had gone back home to Massachusetts, and he had gotten so high that his mom had to section him. So back there, that is basically they put you in a mandatory 30-day rehab. So I canceled the whole entire wedding, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. So I actually left. I packed up all of our things. I moved out of the house we were living in, and I left. He came back to Phoenix after getting out, found me, and at that point, he tried to throw me out of a moving vehicle on the freeway. I had met him to give him back his keys and stuff, and he had tried to throw me out of the vehicle as we were driving. I was horrified, and he said, there's no way you're leaving me. We're gonna go get your stuff, or I'll kill you, and I'll kill your whole family. I was terrified. I never experienced anything like that, and I didn't have the mental, emotional development to even start to process being treated that way. So I did what he said. I moved back in, and it just spiraled from there. I ended up getting pregnant about 6 months after that. So about a year into being married, I ended up getting pregnant. He was on and off of drugs, and he was crazy. He would leave the house and not come home for 3 days. I would be pregnant, trying to find him, trying to figure out what was going on. I would follow him to people's houses to where he was buying drugs. And there was an instance where he threw me down in the street, started kicking me in the stomach, and told me, that is not my child. And it was at that point that, like, I honestly started to really believe in my heart, like, he was going to kill me. I called my mom, who actually was also pregnant at the time. She was now 40 years old. She lived about 2.5 hours away from us. I called her and I said, Mom, if you don't come get me, he's going to kill me. I can't go to my aunts. I can't go to my grandma's. He knows where they live. I need you to come get me. So my mom came and got me. They took away my cell phone, wouldn't let me contact him. He showed up at my grandparents, threw all of my stuff on my grandparents' yard, threatened them if they wouldn't tell him where I was. But they said, you know what, you want to hurt us, because we're not going to tell you where our granddaughter is. So I was with my mom 30 days. Everything was going really well. She was getting ready to deliver her babies because she was actually pregnant with triplets. So being 40, having triplets, she was high risk. So she had been home on bed rest. We got to spend all this time together. And I really, that was the most amount of time I had ever spent with my mom my whole entire life. It was a blessing. And I was about to find out that it was even more of a blessing, because one night I actually had to drive back home, so 2.5 hours away, for my own OB appointment. I was 6 months pregnant at the time. So I drove back home. I woke up in the morning and I had about 45 missed calls. Come to find out, my mom had woken up in the middle of the night and she was really struggling to breathe, went into the hospital. She was severely eclamptic. The only thing to do was to deliver the babies. As they moved her from the gurney to the operating table, she coded and she was unresponsive for over 45 minutes. So they took out I have 3 baby brothers. They're actually 12 now. They ripped them all out so that they could work on my mom. But unfortunately, she'd been without oxygen for so long that she was brain dead. We had her on life support for about 3 days, and we had to make that decision. So here I am, 21 years old now, taking my mom off life support and completely lost. She had come to save me and I didn't know what to do. And so I returned. I went back to my husband because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Things just kind of continued, the same circle, the same spiral, sober, not sober. And I had my son, and it was the same thing. My life was this continuous pattern and carousel wheel of, I would get 6 months of sobriety and be married to a really great person. And then I would get 2 months of just a monster. I don't know how else to say it. Like, it was like being married to Jekyll and Hyde. During that time, I got pregnant again. I miscarried twins. It was just a lot. It was always something. My body was so stressed out. I couldn't eat. I was 105 pounds. I struggled severely with anxiety and depression. I couldn't hold a job because I couldn't leave my house because I was so scared that if I wasn't there to try to control things, that my husband would go out and get high, or that my kids weren't going to be safe. And I never knew, going to sleep at night, kind of like what was I going to wake up to? So it was hard. And every single time, my ex would get high, the only thing that would stop it was rehab, being arrested, or a car accident. And I didn't know how to live through that. I finally got to the point where, how do I keep doing this? We had 2 other children, and it was after my fourth child was born, my little girl, that I finally hit that wall. And I knew that I could no longer survive this. Like, I could no longer experience this. And I just remember one particular moment so much that sticks out in my mind, where I sat in my shower and I cried. And I just was so angry at God, because how could he let me experience this? How could he continued to leave me in this situation. And I tried. I would run. I would leave all the time. I would pack up my kids and hide for days, and I would always come back. It's like you can't break that mental cycle, that abuse, that you're told that you're worthless, that you're not worth anything, that no one will ever love you. Like, that truly starts to become who you are. And so it wasn't too long after that night that my ex-husband actually relapsed again. And so that night I told myself, I'm done. I'm not chasing you. I'm not doing any of it. You leave this house. Don't bother coming back. And he didn't, because that night he got into a head-on collision. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He went into the windshield and suffered a traumatic brain injury. I got up around 3 o'clock in the morning and actually went to see if he had come back, and he didn't. And I knew something. I knew instantly. Even though I had told him not to come back, he would always come back. So I knew instantly that there was something wrong. I threw all my kids in the car that night, and we went out, and we couldn't even get out of our neighborhood because where we lived at the time, there was one way in, one way out. So went out to try to find him, got stopped by a detective. They said, we can't tell you anything. And I said, can you just tell me if I tell you a name in the car, if that's what happened? So lo and behold, it was. He was airbagged. We found him at the hospital he was at, and he was in brain surgery. They had to remove half of his skull. He had over 100 cc's of blood on his brain. And at that point, we had no idea if he was going to survive. So now I carry guilt. Here I am thinking that I can finally do this. I finally have the strength to walk away and say no. And this is what happens. And so there was no way in the world I could leave, because I felt responsible for that. So about a month and a half later, it was a long recovery. We went through neural rehab, all these things. He was able to come back home, and he was basically, functioning. He had some issues with, depression because of the part of the brain that he had injured. But they had told us that he needs to stay sober, because they don't know, because of the damage to the brain, what would happen the next time he got high. So I thought that was it. I was like, you know what, we beat this. That was his bottom. Somehow I've survived all the abuse, and we're past it. 6 months after his accident, he had a family member come out to visit him, and they happened to bring Xanax. The family member suffered from anxiety, and they had Xanax. He found the bottle and ate about 60 pills that night. And I just knew in my heart, and I heard God, and I heard him say, you have to run now and don't ever look back. He was 20 times worse than I'd ever seen him before, behavior-wise. He was frantic. He was searching our house for weapons. I mean, we lived in a state where, you could use weapons where we lived in Arizona, you can go shoot out in the middle of the desert. And so we definitely had those in our house. And I called my best friend on the phone, and I said, if you don't get here now, I don't think the kids and I are going to make it through the night. So my best friend came. I begged his family member to try to get him out of the house some way, buy him cigarettes, a coffee. I don't even care. Just get him out of the house so that I can get the weapons out of the house and the kids. We had just finished packing up all the weapons when they had arrived back, so I hadn't had a chance to leave. And the first thing he did was come back in the house and went for his gun and started screaming, where's my gun? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe you put it somewhere and forgot. And I told his family member, I said, you need to get him outside so I can grab these kids and run. So we had a sliding glass window that led out to our backyard. And that night, she was finally able to get him to go outside and smoke a cigarette. And my best friend and we grabbed my kids. 4 kids. I had a 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and an 8-year-old. So we're trying to grab all these kids and run out of the house. And he saw us through the sliding glass door, and he was carrying a knife. So he chased us out of the house with a knife. My best friend was able to slam. We had a screen door. She slammed the screen door and was holding it shut while he was stabbing the door, and I was trying to get all these kids in the car. So we were able to escape that night, and that was it. I never went back. And it was scary. It was hard. I mean, he was calling me constantly. He was threatening me to kill me. But at that point in time, I felt like my chances were better away from him. You know, if he found me and killed me, like at least I was protecting my kids at that point. Um, you know, so that was it. And I was able to get away. I think I was making like $9 an hour at the time. So I had to figure out things financially, and, you know, it was a whole new ball game. I had been married for almost 9 years. So I got out. I took the kids, and, you know, we started a new life, and it was a
Did
lot.
it?
Yeah.
Yes.
A lot.
Wow. And I mean, there was so much there in just that piece of your story. And I mean, I hardly have words for it, because it's the type of story that you're like, does that even happen to people? Like it's so much trauma and so much things that are happening over and over. And just what I see is just this pattern of loyalty, but also perseverance and strength that also ultimately led you out of that. And I mean, you are strong. You are so strong. It's absolutely incredible. And I mean, just strong even to have the courage to share your story now. And I know that you want to, because you want to help people. But is there anything that you want to talk about now, like your husband, being married to him, and anything like that?
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, looking at my life, and, you know, people are like, oh, yay, you know, like I get a lot of judgment because people are like, oh, you went from a drug abuser to somebody in prison, you know, great choices. Like, you know, there's so many people who look in on my life and on everybody's life, really, and hold these judgments on the way that we live. And I think that's one thing. Just real quick, going back to domestic violence, like, my friends told me I was crazy. My family told me I was crazy. And you mentioned loyalty. A big part of it was loyalty, because I didn't believe in divorce. I didn't want to get divorced. You know, that wasn't my values. And so I thought that this was my only choice, was to stay and to fight and to try to hang on to what I could. You know, we had a family, we had kids. And so I did that for a long time. And I think that, you know, I lost people in my life. I lost friends because they couldn't stand by and watch it anymore. They didn't understand it. And I think that's really important to be really aware of people who are in those situations and why they don't get out. It's because you feel like there is no way out. You know, I had no money. You know, I had a low income job. I had nobody to help with the kids so I could get a better job. And then there was no place safe. I didn't feel like there was a place that was safe that I could run to. So I think that, you know, that's a big thing with people who are surviving domestic violence. And for those of you who are experiencing it right now, like, we need resources for those women to get out. And that's honestly one of the things that I plan on pursuing, and something that I'm very passionate about, because I think that I could have prevented a lot of the things that happened had I had that safe place, had I had that hotline or, you know, number to call with somebody who actually could really understand. Because people would tell me all the time, well, call the cops. Well, what are the cops going to do? They're going to give me a piece of paper, a restraining order? No one, that's not going to stop somebody who wants to hurt you. Um, so yeah, so I think transitioning from that into now, you know, I knew my husband years ago, back when I was actually married for the first time. I knew my current husband then, and he was a wild child. And so um, we lost touch, obviously, that we were just friends. He was actually dating another girl that I used to tattoo model with at the time. And so when we reconnected, I was just like, you know, aren't you in prison? Like, and he's like, yeah, I am. And I'm like, okay. And, you know, for me and everything that I've gone through and what I grew up with, like, I feel like God has always given me this heart to just love people who other people in society might find it hard to love. Um, so I didn't quickly be like, oh gosh, you're in prison, you're a bad person. And I think that happens a lot of times, that people assume you're in prison, you're a bad person. And that's not true. So my husband and I, we started communicating, we started writing, and in the beginning, like, we were not expecting a relationship. He was my best friend, and I could tell him anything, and that's what gave me so much relief and healing, because I was able to tell him everything that I had been through and not be judged for it, because he was on the opposite side of the fence. Like, he's not in prison because he did something great. He's in prison for voluntary manslaughter. That is a very big deal. He took the life of somebody else. And so, him having done what he had done, like, he was able to openly love and accept me. And he was also able to teach me, because he's actually done so much work on himself, that he was able to take those tools that he's learned and help me apply them into my own life. So being with somebody who has been the quote unquote bad guy, and where I've been the quote unquote victim, we had this very dynamic relationship where there was so much that we could teach each other and pour into each other. So it was just incredible. I mean, people still think I'm crazy, and I'm okay with that, because I love him so much, and I couldn't imagine my life without him. I don't think that I would be where I am without him, and the way he's taught me to heal and taught me to forgive.
That's so beautiful. And I think you hit it right on the head, saying that people can judge and they don't completely understand. And yet what matters is your heart, and that you've experienced so much that you're able to understand other people more easily. The people that you said are, you would think, or people think are harder to love, they're actually some of the most easy people to love at times, because they've been hurt and they need love and they deserve love and they have a lot of love to give to. And I think the fact that's exactly what you're saying, is that you recognize that in your husband, and you could build this beautiful relationship on what was hurt and build it back up into something beautiful together, which, I mean, I just absolutely love it so much. I think it's so inspiring, and thank you so much for sharing that and giving us that perspective, because I think it's really important to understand. So I just want to ask you, it probably goes without saying, but I want to hear it from you. Why do you want to tell your story? Like, why did you decide? Because this is intimate, this is vulnerable, and it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, so I think for me, and everything that I've been through, I didn't always see it as powerful, right? I used to see it as embarrassing. I was embarrassed of what I was living through. I was embarrassed to talk about it afterwards, because I felt like I was diminishing myself and my character, and I didn't want people to think that I was a person who allowed those things. But sometimes the things that happen to us in life, I mean, we definitely have choices, right? We all make choices all the time, but it goes beyond what we allow. And I think that there's so many women out there who live in silence, and they're scared to speak out, and they're scared of what other people are going to think about them, and that they're going to be judged, and they're going to think, like, I used to think all the time, like, oh, people are going to think that, like, I'm trashy, or like I have no morals, or I have, none of those things. And I was horrified to tell my story. And I've learned now, and I've learned that, you know, God didn't put me in those situations, and God didn't allow me to suffer for nothing. There is so much pain in our suffering, honestly. And if we can just learn to really dig down deep and embrace that, then we can go out and help other people, because that's our mission. That's what we're all here to do, right? Like, we're all here to serve and serve the kingdom of God. And so if I can have my hand in that, then I want to do it. I'm quietly behind the scenes working on, I don't really know. God's given me this vision, of a book, a blog, a movie. Like I have all these little things in my head, but most importantly, like I want to create that place, the place that I spoke about where like I felt that I had no one to call, nowhere to go. I want to create that place for women because they need to know that they are safe and they need to know that they can get out. There is life after abuse and you can recover and you can go on and do great things. But it's all about having that support system to help get you there. So that's why I want to share my story. I've experienced so many things. Like that's just the tip of the iceberg that I've talked about. I've experienced so many more things, and it's just, it needs to be heard because people need to feel that they belong, right? We all want to feel loved and accepted. And so the more we talk about how much we've actually been through and the struggles that we've actually faced in our life, I think the more we can invite people in and we can love them and we can help them.
Yes. Beautiful heart. And I believe it too. I think, I mean, as unfortunate as it is, God knew this all along and that He'd be able to give you the strength to use it for good. And that's what you're doing. And I think it takes a lot of faith to um, even walk that journey and trying to follow Him where He's put you and help others. So I am just so delighted that we get to, talk about it and start that journey today because this is the first time you're sharing it. So I just want to ask, because you're talking a lot about God and how, He's brought you through this. So have you always had God with you, or what brought you through those hardest moments? Like, what did you
Yeah.
do?
So no, my answer to that is no. I was not raised in a religious household. I mean, we grew up Greek Orthodox. If you wanted to give us a religion, we would, go to the church once a year. Um, but it was actually, so my oldest son, who's 12 now, when he was about 4 years old, he started to really struggle with, he started to realize the things that were happening in our house, right? And I will say that my kids they were never physically harmed by my ex-husband. The abuse was never on my children, it was on me. But of course they saw things, right? And as he started to get 4 and 5 years old, he started having like these nightmares and he would wake up and come crying into my room and say, Mama, I don't want to die. And I mean, that broke my heart, right, as a mom. And I didn't know what to do. And so one night, he came in my room and he woke me up and he said, Mama, I'm not scared to die anymore. And I said, I was obviously half asleep and I'm like, what'd you say, baby? And he's like, I'm not scared to die anymore. And I said, okay. I'm like, that's really good, but like, why? And he said, well, because Jesus just came and sat in my bed and he told me that he died for me. So I don't need to be scared anymore because when I die, I get to go home and be with him. And I mean, that still makes me so emotional because that was also my moment that I knew that I had to get those kids and get them to church. And that's honestly what started my relationship with Christ, was that story, was that moment, because I knew that he was with us, and that was just, it was so evident in that moment that God had been there the whole time. So that's how
I
we
just
started
got
going to.
I just got like the full body chills. I
I
mean,
know, me too.
I mean, what more testimony do you need, right?
Yes, yeah.
Um, so what did your life change after that? Like, what did it look like?
Yeah, so I mean, after that, we started going to church. God started moving really. This was coming towards the end of everything with my ex-husband. So I started to find the church in probably about the last year and a half of that relationship. And I was able to just get completely plugged in. I was plugged in with a small group. I found probably one of my best friends in the whole entire world out of that group who was my age, and that's like we had that connection. I also found somebody who mentored me spiritually. So God just started to pour into my life, and it was those people and God that just really helped propel me to be able to prepare me to get out of that situation. I don't think I would have gotten out had I not been able to find God and really start to understand who I was as his child.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's I mean, that's really like a turning point in a lot of ways for just probably the hope and the peace and everything that you had moving forward and all the relationships and probably, I mean, exactly leading you to what you're doing now. I mean, exactly. So
Absolutely.
that's incredible. So if you had to summarize everything in like the biggest things you've learned, whether it's like just lessons learned for yourself or like what you want people to take away from your story, like what would you say it would be? And that's a big question. So,
That is the big question. Well, first, I don't want people to think that it was easy. And I think that when I talk about the things that I've been through, I can smile now, right? And I can talk about it and not become emotional and cry. Um, but that does not mean that I am still not haunted occasionally by what I've been through. So I want people to understand that as you're traveling down your path, right, and you're trying to recover and move on from these things, it's not a walk in the park. It hasn't been a walk in the park. You know, I've made plenty other mistakes in between my first husband and my husband now. I've experienced plenty other events during that time. It wasn't like God came and grabbed my hand and pulled me out and was like, set me free. Like, okay, life's perfect. Um, God gave me the means to be able to handle the things that I've been through. So I think that if you're in a place right now that you're struggling and you don't know Jesus, just open up your heart and invite him in. Like that's got to be number one, right? Because all those answers and the tools and the things that we need to be able to deal with what we're going through, he's going to give to us. So and I think that, you know, there's still times in my life where I'm triggered. Obviously, I have 3 children with the person who put me through abuse. And while he's not completely in the picture and he's kind of fallen off the face of the earth, when he does try to come back in or contact us, it does rise a lot of anxiety in me. And there are times that I still feel like I still lose sleep at night and think he's going to come and get me and take my kids. So it's not this just, you know, straight and narrow, amazing walk. Like you're still going to go through it. It's just about finding those people to support you, having that relationship with Christ, and just you gotta trust. Like you gotta trust God that He's gonna bring you through, and it's gonna be for His glory, you know. And
yeah,
He's gonna give
yeah.
you a testimony, and if you can just put that out there and help other people, it'll be worth it. And I know that sounds crazy, but everything that I've been through, it's been worth it now.
Yeah, and I haven't personally experienced things that you have, but of course, we all have hard things in our life. And I know that there's hard things coming up in our life for all of us, right? That we don't know about yet. And I think that this, like hearing your story and hearing the hope that you have, and just like the words that you just said, honestly is going to be something that I'm going to hold on to personally for a very long time because I think you're someone who has walked through it, who's lived through fire and just tragedy, and yet you're here today sharing the hope that comes out of that and walking in it and showing the perseverance and the courage. And so if you can do it, we all can do it, right?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
so last question, and it's
Sure.
kind of similar along the lines of the other one, but just is there any last thing that you want to say to someone who might be walking in something similar today or something difficult like that?
I think that, you know, like I said, like hit your knees. Like you got to hit your knees and you have to ask Jesus into your heart. And you're not going to understand the path that he's giving you. It's not going to all make sense when everything is happening. So if you can just hold on to your faith and trust in God, he will get you out. Um, but you need to also have a support system. And if you're in the place where I was, where you started to lose friends, you know, people are tired of hearing your same old sob story, hit me up. Like Stephanie could give you my information. I would be more than happy to talk to you, to just listen, because I feel like sometimes we just need people to listen. And we can find our own clarity through just telling people where we're at and how we're feeling. But you just got to find those people. You got to have Christ, and you got to have a support system.
There you go. That's awesome. Wow. Thank you, Lacy, for sharing your story, for opening up, for being vulnerable and doing it for the sake of others and knowing that you're following God. It's beautiful. It's an absolute honor. Like, it's like being able to have this conversation with you gives me so much drive and energy to know, like, this feels right. Like, this is what I thought it would feel like to be able to do this and to like have this intimate space with people like you that are telling something difficult about their story. And I just hope you hear in my voice, you see it in my face, that I'm just completely thankful and grateful. And I want to stay friends with you. I think this is just the beginning of a blossoming friendship. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. And just thank you for everyone who was listening today.
Wow, that was such a powerful conversation. At the beginning, I mean, I even struggled to find words because it's just, there's so much trauma wrapped up in all of that, and there's a lot of tragedy, yet she's found ways to come out of that stronger, with more hope, more light in her life. She's thriving, and she's wanting to use her story for good, to share it with others. And I love that she has the courage and the strength to do that, but the heart behind it, that she wants to glorify God, that she wants to help other people, other women who are struggling with violence or teen pregnancy, or having family members in prison, any of those things. And I just think that when I look at her, I just see so much beauty inside and out, and I'm just so thankful to even be able to enter this space with her and have this conversation. So I hope you found it powerful too, and if you did, please consider sharing it with someone else. That's what these interviews are for, so that we can better understand each other, love each other, and just create this intimate space where we can build relationships together and spread more love around the world. So if you can comment below, and I would love to continue the conversation there. And as always, there will be a new video coming out each Tuesday. So if you go to lovelightstories.com, you can get signed up there to receive an email the next time a story drops. And until then, I'll be thinking of you, praying for our world, and we'll see you next time.